Yo, what's going on, guys? Happy Thursday, November 16th, 2023, and welcome to a brand new edition of what I like to call For the Birds. I am your host, the vegan you believe in, Kurt Cadet, aka Conscious Kurt, in the flesh as always. And here on For the Birds, I like to talk about the different forms of negative and toxic behavior, the effects that behavior has on us and our mental health, and what we could do to have a better understanding of it, have better control over it, in order to have a better quality of our lives going forward. I want to talk to you guys today about a topic that's become very popular over the last few years. It's been a very big talking point, and one that I can say as a man I can also identify with. And that topic I want to talk to you guys about today is toxic masculinity. I came across the term toxic masculinity, I would say about 5.5 years ago. And basically, the way it's defined is being someone who's so obsessed with proving how manly they are and proving how tough they are and how hard they are, that in the process, they have a hard time expressing their feelings, showing their feelings, and also in the process, more than anything, making an ass of themselves while trying so hard to prove how manly they are. And recently, I've come across a lot of people counter arguing this, saying that masculinity is not toxic, but the absence of masculinity is toxic. And yes, I do agree that there's truth to that. And I do agree that not fully embracing your manhood is not a good thing. But at the same time, there is some truth and there is some legitimacy to the whole toxic masculinity issue. Because as a man, I know I've been guilty of it myself throughout my life, where maybe I had to prove how tough I was, prove how much of a man I was, and not let myself look weak in front of certain people I didn't want to look weak in front of. And in hindsight, looking back at it, I realized how wrong that was and also how limiting that was. Because if you're somebody who grows up to believe that it's weakness to show that you have feelings, it's weakness to ever smile, it's weakness to ever be in a good mood or ever, let yourself be vulnerable, that is not a healthy way to live. It's not only not a healthy way to live, it is also a very toxic way to live. And that's why I think when it comes to things like that, the term toxic masculinity definitely fits. There's nothing wrong with being tough. There's nothing wrong with embracing your manhood, embracing your manliness. But when you have to go out of your way to prove it and you have to go out of your way to shove it down people's throats, then that's a problem. Because if you are a real man and you know who the fuck you are and you know what you have to offer, then you do not need to prove it to anybody. But when you try too hard and you go out of your way to prove how much of an alpha you are, how much of a real man you are, how masculine you are, and how women submit to you and all this other jazz, when you really have to go out of your way to prove it and go out of your way to say it to everybody, then it becomes a lot harder to believe you. Now, is the term toxic masculinity sometimes overused and exaggerated? Of course it is. I'll be the first one to admit that shit to you. But I've come across a lot of men, whether it be in my real life or whether it be through social media or television, where I can definitely tell that that toxic masculinity shit is real. And by denying it, downplaying it, and acting like it's not really a problem at all, you are making it an even bigger problem. So, what are different examples of toxic masculinity that are legit, that are real, and that are problems that need to be dealt with? What are different examples of it? Well, one of those examples I'm going to talk about today is trying too hard to prove your manliness. As I talked about a few minutes ago, anybody who's a real man and anybody who's sure of themselves and knows who they are, they don't need to broadcast it and they don't need to prove it to anybody. But unfortunately, there are a lot of men out there who do have that need to prove it to everybody, to broadcast it to anybody who will listen, and to just shove it down people's throats nonstop. Whether they're bragging about how much weight they can lift at the gym, or how many girls they could pull when they go out, or how many shots they could take without passing out at a bar. A lot of men will just talk about that shit and brag about that shit nonstop and just wear it like it's a badge of honor. And hey, if you're able to do those things, yo, that's great. Round of applause. More power to you. But always having that need to prove it to everybody and to impress everybody and show off to everybody, that shit is not manly. No matter what manly activity you think you're doing, having to go out of your way to show it off to everybody and impress everybody, that shit is as unmanly as it gets. Because if you're somebody who always has to call yourself a real man and label yourself as a real man and label yourself as an alpha, chances are you probably aren't one. Because somebody who really is about that shit, who really lives that shit, that's exactly what they do. They live it. They don't brag about it. They don't shove it in people's faces. They just live it and do their own thing. But unfortunately, some men feel that pressure and feel that need to show it off to the world and broadcast it to anybody who's willing to listen. And that shit is toxic. Anytime you have to go out of your way to convince other people to believe something about you, then you've already lost. I think it traces back for a lot of us to when we're kids, when maybe we feel the need to prove to our dads or to our granddads or to our uncles that we're tough, that we're manly just like they are, and always constantly trying to win their approval. And another area that stretches to is, let's say, if you're a teenager and you're in high school and you have your guy group of friends, you may constantly feel the need to, prove yourself in front of them and look cool in front of them and look tough in front of them, because by doing that, they'll accept you. Yeah, because if you grow up that way where you constantly feel like you need to prove how tough you are, prove how manly you are, and gain the respect of everybody around you, then chances are you're going to grow up to be an adult who feels the need to do the same thing. That respect that you're looking for, that seal of approval that you're looking for, is not something you're going to get from somebody else. No matter how many pats on the back you get from your friends, no matter how many pats on the back you get from your father, until you can give yourself a pat on the back and not have the need to prove it so much to everybody else, then anybody else's validation is worthless. And another example of toxic masculinity that does exist and that is a huge problem is constantly holding in your feelings. I know a lot of men can identify with this because I know I've been through it myself. When you're a boy and you're growing up, you're constantly taught to never cry, to never show your feelings, to never show weakness, and to toughen up whenever something bad happens. Yeah, when you grew up thinking that way and you grow up thinking that it's not good for you to show emotions, it's not good for you to show feelings, it's not good for you to cry, then when you grow up to be an adult, you're going to have a hard time expressing your feelings and showing people who you really are. And you know what's going to happen when you have that problem? You're going to have a hard time maintaining healthy relationships with other people and especially maintaining a healthy relationship with you. When you can't ever express your feelings and you refuse to ever express your feelings and refuse to ever allow yourself to be vulnerable, then you will never, ever grow. Because the more you hold those feelings in, the more you think that it's wrong to ever express them and ever let them out, the more they're going to take over your life. Yeah, unfortunately, many of us growing up were taught that you should never show feelings, you should never show any emotion, you should always hold your feelings in. And as a result, we grew up to be adults who had a hard time processing our feelings, who had a hard time maintaining relationships, and who had a hard time finding happiness. Yeah, because holding in your feelings and never letting them out is not happy people shit. Because that kind of behavior and that kind of way of dealing with shit is miserable, unhappy people shit. Yeah, it's very scary when a man can't bring himself to cry ever. Whether it's a tragedy that happened or a loved one or a close one died, if you're a man who can't ever bring himself to cry at all, ever, then that's some scary ass shit. And I urge you, if you are a man who has that problem, to seek help ASAP. Because whoever raised you to think that it was okay to hold your feelings in and never show any weakness and never allow yourself to be vulnerable. Yeah, because anybody who told you that you should never express your feelings and you should always hold them in and you should never show any kind of emotion whatsoever, they fucking told your ass wrong. Because doing that shit from the time you were a kid to the time you were an adult and not ever doing anything to fix it will only lead to a life of misery. And if that's what you really think manliness is, even if it leads to that kind of life and that kind of outcome, then I can't think of anything more sad. And lastly, a huge example of toxic masculinity that is a huge problem that needs to be checked is constantly labeling things as girly. Oh, yes, I've seen this happen all too often, where a lot of guys will refuse to do something, will refuse to partake in something just because they think it looks girly, just because they think it's just something women do, and just because they think they'll look like less of a man if they partake in those things. And some of those examples I'm going to list for you today are things like going to yoga, listening to R&B music, watching the show Friends, and my personal favorite, going to therapy. Yeah, it's crazy. There are literally a lot of men out there who will brush off therapy and refuse to ever go to therapy just because they think it's too girly. You're a bitch if you go to therapy. You're a weak ass if you go to therapy. You should put some panties on if you're gonna go to therapy. Shut the fuck up. And that's the sad part. A lot of men will grow up throughout their lives swallowing that bullshit when it comes to therapy, when it comes to doing yoga, when it comes to listening to R&B or girly type music. That over time, they end up sabotaging themselves. A lot of those things that I mentioned would make them a lot happier, would do them a lot of good, and would honestly get them a lot further in life. But because they believe that stigma when it comes to those things, that they're girly, that they're soft, and all that bullshit, they refuse to ever give it a chance. And that shit is mad whack. When it comes to things like doing yoga and going to therapy and all that, they have such a need to prove their manliness, show their manliness, and let the world see it that ever partaking in that stuff, ever giving that stuff a chance, will make them feel like they're less of a man. And they can't have that. They can't look like less of a man. They can't show their feelings because all their friends are going to laugh at them. All the people that they want to impress are going to laugh at them, make fun of them, and not think that they're manly and not respect them because they give a fuck too much about what other people think. But refusing to give those things a chance and always labeling them as girly and always labeling them as soft is some clown ass shit. And also, more than anything, that shit, that always having to go out of your way to prove how manly you are shit, that always holding in your feelings shit, that labeling going to therapy and doing yoga as girly shit, that shit, all of it is for the birds. And until you grow the fuck up and see it that way, you won't ever be the real man that you're always trying so hard to be. So now that I've broken down the different examples of toxic masculinity and also how self-destructive it is, what are different things men can do to cure themselves of that toxic masculinity and still be real men and still be masculine men, but not have to go out of their way to prove it all the time? What are some of the things men can do for this? Well, the first thing they need to do, the first major thing they need to do is ignore those outside forces. The reason why a lot of men never show their true feelings and refuse to do things like go to therapy or listen to R&B music is because they were taught by someone or taught by a group of people to behave that way. They were encouraged by their dad, they were encouraged by their granddad, they were encouraged by their uncles, they were encouraged by their group of friends, older brother, whatever it was. That kind of behavior was definitely taught to them. And the reason why a lot of men hold on to these outdated mentalities and still act this way is because they still have that need to impress those people and look cool in front of those people and look like they're hot shit in front of those people. But they would be doing themselves a huge favor and doing themselves a huge service and would be having a major breakthrough in their lives if they stopped giving a fuck so much about what those other people think. Because when you stop giving a fuck about what other people think so much and whether or not they're going to like you or think you're a man or not, then you'll have the freedom to live your life on your own damn terms. And when you're living your life on your own terms and you're living your life freely, you won't feel the need to go out of your way to prove to other people how manly you are, how tough you are, and how strong you are. You won't give a damn. And you also may be more open-minded to going to therapy, to doing yoga, to doing things that are labeled as girly, because also you don't give a damn what other people think about it. This doesn't just tie into the whole toxic masculinity thing. This also ties into other areas of life where many of us would be a lot happier and live our lives a lot freer if we stopped giving a fuck about impressing other people, and especially other people that we probably don't even like and who probably suck. If you really want to be a real man and if you want to have that respect of being a real man, then one of the main things you need to do is stop giving other people's opinions that much weight. If you're a man who wants to listen to some R&B music or some Taylor Swift or some Madonna or some pop music, that is your prerogative. If you're a man who wants to go to therapy, talk out your issues and not hold your feelings in, that's your prerogative. If you're a man who wants to go to a yoga class and hell even teach a yoga class, that's your prerogative. You don't have to shy away from those things or refuse to do those things just because of what other people are going to say about it. Fuck their opinions. Fuck their feelings. Fuck what they have to say. Because like I said earlier in this episode, if you are a real man and you know who the hell you really are, then what other people think of you and what other people have to say about you and the way you live your life does not fucking matter. And another way a lot of men could rid themselves of the whole toxic masculinity thing and progress further is by allowing themselves to be vulnerable. As I said before, a lot of us men were taught growing up that we need to shake things off, not show our true feelings, never cry, and just toughen up. And as a result of that, many of us grew up to be adults who were unhappy, who held their feelings in, and just didn't know how to process them. But the only way you'll ever be able to process them and the only way you'll ever be able to grow in life for real is by letting those feelings out and allowing yourself to be vulnerable when you really are vulnerable. I know there are times where you legit need to put on a strong face and you do need to put on a tough face, but there are other times when it is okay to let all that shit out. Showing your feelings, being vulnerable, and even in some cases crying does not make you less of a man. Because all of us go through shit. Trauma, personal tragedies, broken relationships, whatever it is. All of us go through some kind of trial or tribulation. But when we go through those situations and they're taking a toll on us, it is okay to allow yourself to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about those things. It's okay to talk about how they're making you feel. And it's okay to cry if it's that upsetting to you. When you hold them in, when you don't express how you feel, when you're afraid to ever be vulnerable and afraid to ever cry, you are letting all those issues, you're letting all those tragedies you've gone through and traumas dictate your life. But when you let those feelings out and you express them in a healthy way, then they can't control you. They can't own you. They can't take over. The reason why is because you're letting them out and not holding them in. And then when you let all of that out of your system, then you can progress further because those things are no longer holding you back. And that's the thing. By not being able to express your feelings and not being able to allow yourself to be vulnerable, you are holding yourself back. because you have to work through those issues. You have to deal with those issues, and you have to get past those issues, because not doing so and refusing to do so is not manly, is not masculine. And more than anything, just holding in your feelings and refusing to ever express them and never allowing yourself to be vulnerable is the ultimate bitch move. Am I saying you need to cry all the time and be overly sensitive all the time? No, absolutely not. But when something tragic happens, when something sad happens, or anything along those lines, it's okay to be sad about it. If you feel like you need to cry, if you feel like you need to talk to someone, if you feel like you need to get that shit out, then do it. You're not a bitch. You're not a soft ass. You're not feminine by doing those things. The one thing you are by doing those things is human. And it's okay at some points when you don't feel like your best self and you don't feel like your strongest self and you do feel like you are vulnerable. And trust me, once you allow yourself to be vulnerable at the times you need to be vulnerable, then you'll be entering a different phase of your life. And a phase of your life that will open new possibilities for you. And finally, a way a lot of men can cure themselves of the toxic masculinity bullshit and progress further in their lives is by having a desire and having a need to change. One thing a real man always has the desire to do is to grow and progress. And by constantly holding on to these outdated mentalities about what a real man is and what manliness is, then you are not growing. You are not progressing, and you are holding yourself back. A real man always wants to grow. A real man always wants to see how much further he can go in life. And a real man always has the desire to change his toxic ways. When you're a man who wants to change, who wants to progress, and who wants to be better, then one of the ways you'll go about making those changes is by ridding yourself of that toxic masculinity bullshit. You'll be someone who's brave enough to talk about their feelings when they never did before. You'll be someone who's brave enough to go to therapy when they never went before. And you'll be someone who's brave enough to allow themselves to be vulnerable when they've never done that before. When you're a man who really has that desire and really has that need to change, you won't allow outdated mentalities of what real manliness is. You won't let the opinions of other people and what they think, and you won't let the way you were raised stand in your way of that. Anything that tries to stand in your way, any obstacles that try to hold you back, you will run them the fuck over. The reason why is because you want to change. You want to do better. You want to be better. You saw the way the old way worked and you saw the way you turned out in the process and you realized that that shit does not work for you. So you made the decision to switch it up. So if you really want to shed yourself of that toxic masculinity and stop thinking that showing emotions and showing your feelings makes you weak, then you have to want to make that change. You have to put in the effort, you have to put in the time, and you have to put in the energy to become a better version of yourself. And some of those ways of putting in the work do include going to therapy, ignoring what other people think about you, living your life on your terms, and allowing yourself to feel sad and feel emotions whenever some shit goes down. But if you have that desire to change and you have that need to change and you're willing to do anything in order to change, then you're already a real man. So my final thoughts on this whole topic are this. I personally don't think it's healthy when a man grows up to be overly sensitive, to cry all the time, to be overly emotional, and to fall apart when things don't go their way. And I do think it is healthy to embrace what makes you a man and embrace what makes you masculine and to keep yourself together even when things aren't going your way. As a 37-year-old man myself, this is an issue I have struggled with throughout my life. When I was younger, I was someone who was too sensitive, who was too soft, who cried too much, and who showed their weaknesses a lot more than they should have. And as I got older, I realized the downsides of being that way and the negative sides of being that way. So I started embracing more of my masculinity and embracing more of my manliness. And while I did embrace my masculinity more and embrace my manliness more, I also realized at the same time how important it was to still be someone who could show their feelings, show their emotions, and be vulnerable when the time presented itself. And I think it all comes down to a healthy balance between the two. Embracing the side of you that is strong, that is masculine, that is manly, while also embracing the side of you that is vulnerable, that does go through a lot of emotions, and that does feel the need to cry and let those emotions out from time to time. Because no matter what anybody told you, no matter what bullshit they try to shove down your throat, it is okay to be both. It's okay to be a man who embraces his masculinity, who embraces his manliness and all that good stuff. And it's also okay to be a man who feels emotions, who feels sad, who feels vulnerable, and isn't afraid to cry. You don't have to pick one or the other. And if more of us men would embrace that mentality and blend both sides together as opposed to having to choose between one or the other, then a lot of us would progress a lot further in our lives. In our relationships, in our lifestyles, in our way of thinking, the list goes on and on. If more of us men would find that healthy balance between both sides, then the fucking possibilities are endless. Watching that Jeezy interview with Nia Long last week really opened my eyes because as somebody who saw Jeezy when he first came out in 2005 to seeing him now, he is the prime example of making that change and finding that healthy balance between both sides. And if somebody like him can change and progress from where he came from to where he is now, then any of us can. No matter how challenging it is, no matter how limiting your beliefs are, you can make that change too. But you have to want it. You have to allow yourself to express certain feelings you never expressed before and be vulnerable in a way you never been before. And also, more than anything, stop caring what other people think. So find that balance, do your own thing. And as long as you're secure in your manhood, and as long as you know that you're a real man, then that's all that should matter. Well, that's all the time I have for you guys today here on For the Birds. And like I said before, I'm not a licensed doctor or therapist, but I do have a lot of experience in my personal life going through these issues. So I like to use this podcast as a platform and helping others get through them a lot easier than I did. And if you ever want to talk to me or chop it up with me in any way, you can follow me on my various social media sites, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Look up my first and last name on Facebook and LinkedIn, and also the name Conscious Kurt on Instagram. Send me a message, send me a friend request. I would love to talk it up with you. Also, if you want to listen to other episodes of this podcast in the archives, you can find it on Spotify, Spreaker, or YouTube. Subscribe to it. Leave a comment under the episodes. Let me know what you like about them, what you don't like about them. And also feel free to shoot me topics that you would like to see me talk about in coming episodes that you believe are for the birds. And for a long time to come, I will be here on this podcast talking about different forms of toxic and negative behavior, the effects that behavior has on us and our mental health, and what we could do to have a better understanding of it and more control over it in order to have a better quality of our lives in the future. So until next time, this is Kurt Cadet, aka Conscious Kurt, for another edition of For the Birds. Take care, God bless, and remember, don't be an asshole in real life or social media, because that shit is for the birds. Have a good one.